We have to make this place accessible to as many people as possible. So let's refer to the ADA. ADA. Capital A, capital D, capital A. ADA. Okay, first off, those capital letters are important, especially in engineering, because if you write capital A, capital D, capital A, I'll know it's an acronym. And it stands for the Americans with Disabilities Act of 1990. And if you say ADA like that, then I'll also know it means that Americans with Disabilities Act as well. Whereas if you say ADA and you spell capital A, lowercase d, lowercase a, then I'll think you're talking about the programming language ADA, which is an entirely different engineering word for a future episode. I am talking about the Americans with Disabilities Act of 1990, and it is actually a really, really important federal law in the USA that affects not only engineers, but basically everyone, every citizen in the US. It's a civil rights law, and civil rights laws generally affect everybody. There are several parts or titles to the ADA. For example, Title I has to do with employment or labor, and it basically says you can't discriminate against someone with or without a disability when you're hiring. And in that way, it does affect engineering companies, but it also affects everybody, whether you're an employer or an employee, inside or outside engineering. So I'm not going to focus on the labor part of the ADA. Instead, I want to talk about the parts or the titles that make engineers do a little bit more thinking and a little bit more work, and for a good reason. Title II of the ADA and Title III of the ADA have to do with increased accessibility to public services, public buildings, public entities. It has to do with streets and transportation and access to restrooms, all that stuff. My civil engineer coworker, whenever she talked about the ADA, she would always use the very, very easily understandable example of curb cuts in the sidewalk. When you go to an intersection, and if it's a newer development, there's a curb cut. There's a little ramp as you transition from the sidewalk down to the road, and then again going back up into the next sidewalk. There's another curb cut. And it makes it easier for me to use the roads. If I'm in a wheelchair or on crutches or something, that will help me have the same accessibility that anyone else may have for these public roads. And it's great. My civil engineering coworker used to use this example because if we design to make our roads more accessible for even this person in a wheelchair or for elderly people with mobility issues, it's actually great for everyone. I don't know about you, but I like curb cuts. And so Title II and Title III of the ADA are associated with a whole bunch of design standards for buildings and other types of services so that you can be more accessible to as many people as possible. And sometimes when engineers talk about or say ADA, they're really talking about the ADA standards for accessibility guidelines. That's the documentation that says, hey, a restroom is only accessible if it's this wide and this deep, or a ramp at the intersection should look like this, stuff like that. I don't want to trivialize the ADA or these standards. It's actually quite comprehensive, and it has to do with much more than curb cuts. You should look it up. And especially if you're a civil engineer or any type of engineer that has to design for lots and lots of access to a space. I mentioned Title I, and I talked about Title II and Title III of the ADA. Well, Title IV of the ADA has to do with accessibility of telecommunications technology. And it's part of the ADA that spurred on development of telecommunications devices for the deaf, among other things. So you can see already that it follows the same goal or spirit of making public life more accessible to everybody. So all in all, the ADA is pretty specific in who it explicitly affects in engineering. It affects American engineers or people who do business in America. It affects civil, architectural, and telecommunications engineers. But even beyond those people who clearly have to think about the ADA actually affects engineers in general, even outside those disciplines and outside the USA. Because the ADA is just so important, so primary among a ton of engineers' minds. The USA is huge, we have a lot of engineers, and even if I, as a biomedical engineer, don't have to design curb cuts, I work with and am educated with and educated by other engineers who have to know about the ADA, who have to know about more universal design principles. And so that sensibility will go into my brain and my education as well. And maybe I'll think about making my medical devices more accessible. Or the software engineer will think about making their website more accessible. Or the mechanical engineer will design a left-handed can opener as well as a right-handed one. It's just the idea that a whole bunch of people are putting accessibility at the top of their design mind. And when it's important to so many people, that value will spread. This is why the ADA is my engineering acronym of the day. This has been Engineering Word of the Day with yours truly, Pius Wong. I'm an engineer and an educator, and if you like this engineering education stuff, please support me. You can donate at patreon.com/PiosLabs. A link is in the show notes. Thanks.